Good evening. Good evening, members of the Historic Preservation Commission. We have an unusual situation this evening, and both the chair and the vice chair have excused absences this evening. So we will ask you to choose a chair pro tem from among the current membership. So if there's anyone that would like to offer to volunteer, or if there's a nomination, we would consider that at this time.
I nominate Terry Hill.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I nominate Thais.
Well, I would second Terry Hill's nomination.
All right.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, well then, Mr. Hill, you'll be serve as the chair this evening.
Yeah, the gavel will be passing to you, and
I'm not gonna move.
yeah, that's fine to stay seated where you are.
It's 7:02, the meeting is in order. If you'd stand, we'll stand for the allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are we supposed to say under God? Didn't we take under God? Oh, okay. Oh.
Well, I'm going to mention something first. And I've been talking about this with Tony. And I had a problem, electronic problem with my printer this afternoon. And I wasn't able to print out his email that he sent out with all the emails with the city attorney and with Matthew Winiger. And so he had, fortunately for me today, an extra copy, and so I can read from that, but I'm going to be a little bit behind on the issue of that particular item. Okay, with that being said, will you take the roll call, please?
Yes, Chairman Hill,
Here.
Commissioner Vogt,
Here.
Commissioner Quinn,
Here.
Commissioner Convery,
Here.
and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. Commissioner James.
Here.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, Chairman McCready and Vice Chair Akins have excused absences this evening.
Can I interrupt one? The IT tech called and said to remind Chair Hill, please turn on his microphone.
Oh.
So if everybody could help remind you.
I'm already guilty. Okay. As far as the public communications, I'm to read this. Members of the public wishing to address the Historic Preservation Commission on items appearing on the agenda are required to complete a speaker's card and file it with the secretary prior to the start of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. Cards are available in the council chambers lobby. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the chair. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and must direct their comments to the chair, not the audience or press. While the Historic Preservation Commission is in session, members of the commission, city staff, and members of the audience are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the chair. I see our first item on the business is Mark's here. Mark, could you give us a museum report?
By the way, my slip is.
Thank you, Chairman Pro Tem Hill.
Okay.
I'm Mark Lewis. I'm the president of the board of the Ojai Valley Museum. And I had the honor today to represent the, I guess you could call it the historical preservationist community at the presentation by Mayor Blatz of the Preservationist of the Year Award plaque to Pat Weinberger. Mayor-elect Johnston was also there, and Ojai Quarterly publisher Brett Bradigan, and Ms. Weinberger was very touched and very pleased to receive it, and it was a nice occasion. So, very good moment there, and I was happy to be there and honored. At the museum, we are currently working on our next exhibit, which is will open January 7th. It's called Inventing Ojai. It is essentially tied to the upcoming centennial. Well, we're actually in the middle of what you might say is a year-long centennial celebrating what Edward Libby did in Ojai. The exhibit is going to go into why he did it and why it matters. I noticed that his home is actually on the agenda tonight, so it's very appropriate. And we're looking forward to having a particularly special exhibit, and we hope everyone will come on. It'll open on January 7th, and we'll be there up and through April 8th, I believe. And that concludes the museum report.
Mark, before you go, I have a question. What's the status of the gate? I was under the impression that we were going to be talking about the gate soon.
We would certainly hope that you are. There was an issue of timing in terms of dotted I's and crossed T's and deadlines and things that our executive director said she ran afoul of a timing thing, which put it off until your next meeting. Kind of a technicality.
All right.
Now, we certainly hope that, yes, indeed, that will be taken up soon.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
It is tentatively scheduled for the December meeting.
Good.
I mean, the January meeting.
Okay. All right. The consent items, can we have a reading of the minutes? Are there any objections or corrections to the minutes?
Move approval of the meeting minutes?
I second that.
All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 I have to abstain. Okay. Is that the same letter?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay.
A little different order.
Thank you very much.
All right. We have a disclosure of the site visits and ex parte contacts.
I made a visit to the Libby property, at least looked at it from the street, and I noted that there's construction work going on the northern parcel. At least I saw a backhoe up there doing some work, and that seems to me to precede the possible permit, and otherwise may be in violation of the Mills Act contract. So it might be appropriate for a representative of the city to take a look up there and see what's going on.
You could,
There was a couple of trees that died in there.
Hold on, perhaps if recognized by the chair, you could come to the microphone, or else it could be discussed when your item comes up in a few minutes. Thank you. We need to have everything on the microphone, most importantly.
Okay. What would you like, since you brought up the point?
I think I'm going to be satisfied with what this gentleman has to say, so let's...
Like me to come up?
Sure.
I believe there was a few trees that had dried out and had died, and they were planting some new oaks in that area, and so they were just digging the holes for the oaks. It was all on our tree report, and I think that's supposed to take place next week. There's 5 oak trees that are coming, and they're going to go in, and so it was all permitted through the city, is my understanding. So
I withdraw my comment.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. All right. Now, we'll get right into the public hearing item, and this is on the work permit for the very house that we're just talking about. So, do you have something from the
I should immediately recuse myself, and I have left a slip, so I do have some comments to make as well. So
Go ahead.
Move on to the audience.
Anthony is going to be making these as a private citizen, and he is recusing himself now.
And for the record, Commissioner Vogt is recusing himself because he lives at a property within 500 feet of the subject property, 1,000 Foothill Avenue. But he's entitled to comment as a individual at public comment, but must recuse from the commission's consideration, given that he has property within 500 feet.
Yeah, he's a neighbor.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank-
All right. Now, did you want to say something first?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is a work permit for the consideration by the Historic Preservation Commission prior to consideration later by the Planning Commission. You have reviewed this project previously as a in the pre-concept review, and there are minutes in your packet from that that previous review, if you want to refer to that. The proposal is to build a 2,300 square foot single-family home with a detached garage on a separate legal parcel, which is currently vacant aside from vegetation and some pre-existing structures like an abandoned swimming pool. But the parcel is part of the what's considered the larger Libby home property. It is part of the historic designation for the landmark consideration, Ojai Historic Landmark number 4, and is also included under the Mills Act contract, which governs the Libby house. So therefore, it is appropriate for the Historic Preservation Commission to consider any development on this property. Your staff report goes into some of the background on the property as it applies and is affected by the Mills Act contract and its landmark status. You were provided with another version of the staff report this evening, which merely contains the signatures of the consulting planner and the community development director. Staff has no other comments to make at this time, but we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time or after the applicant's presentation.
All right. We're open for discussion. Commissioners, anybody want to wade in?
You might take public comment before beginning your discussion.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mark. Would you like to address the commission and say something about the project, the architect, et cetera?
Are we going to have public comment first? Or?
No, go your presentation, please.
I don't really have much of a. My printer wasn't working either, so I brought my laptop. I don't really have much of a presentation. I don't want to be redundant on what you guys saw at the last meeting. I think my name is Ramin Shamshiri. Address is 1,000 Foothill Road. As you know, it's also the Libby House, and I think we're here to review the more almost final drawings that we've submitted for our property on the adjacent vacant lot at 1010 Foothill. As you noted, we're looking to remove the old abandoned pool and build 2 new structures as well as a tennis court. And I think I noted the last time our design intent is really to use the current language of the existing structures to design and build the new additions. I think you've all seen the plans and the concept review, and as you know, the scale, the roof pitch, the materials, the windows will all mimic the other structures with a nod to the existing architecture, but a more modern take on it. So I think I really wanted to see if you had any comments or questions based on our submittal plans.
All right. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, did the architect want to show us any drawings at this point?
We submitted the set. I think.
Yeah, there are plans in your packet.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
The plans haven't changed since you came here before, is that correct?
Yeah.
So we went through this, if you
We did.
recall, and we saw everything projected and had a really good review, and
I
It's-
have them here if we want, if
yeah.
we want to project it on
But
there.
I think it was just, I think the question was, has anything changed that we should know about? And it doesn't sound like that's
Not
the case.
significantly, no. No, the details have gone, we're going through kind of the specifics. We did all the structural engineering, we did a lot of the mechanical engineering we've been going through. And, we slightly adjusted some of the windows, but that was it.
But design-wise, we were really happy with the presentation you
Yes,
made.
it's pretty
So
much-
that is still the status of the project.
Yeah, so we
Correct.
spent the last few months going through the nuts and bolts and kind of making it all work, because that was really a conceptual review, but it's really essentially the same plan.
That's all.
Any others?
How does the architecture of your new project compare to the Libby House? Is it similar? I forgot.
Yeah, it really is, it's there to mimic, I mean, we use all the proportions of the existing house. Like I said, the pitch, the scale, and we really are kind of almost copying the house. The big change is really the glass on the southern and eastern sides of the house. Rather than doing the batten board, we replace it with glass to give it a more modern feel, and so it doesn't feel like, so you can, but from far away, I think the idea is it just should feel like part of the property, and that it's always been there. That's the intention.
Any others? I have some comments. One of the things that, I don't recall us doing this, when we had the concept review presentation, and that was, and I noticed that there's 2 pages devoted to this, almost 2.5, and that's the scope of the HPC review, the Mills Act contract, and they talked a lot about the view, the historic landscape, and what you can't do and what you can do. Now, do you have any comment about that?
The view of the historic landscape of
Yeah, it has stipulations that you can't eliminate the open space for the view from the historic landmark or the chance to see the historic landmark with this building obstructing any of the view looking at the historic.
Yeah, I mean, with the way we cited it and the way it's set up, I mean, you will see the new buildings from the house through the trees. You don't see anything from the street, so it doesn't change the view from the street at all. And as far as the historic nature of that property, I mean, there is an abandoned pool there that I think is from the 60s, or
Yeah, that's not.
it's not original,
Right.
and that's the one. It's kind of a real eyesore that we wanted to demo, and then the current lot, and we're not really, taking out any heritage trees or anything like that. So the current lot that is fairly open. So
No.
the intention was to work. We love the trees, we love the oaks, we love the feel of the property. So we don't want to do anything to change the feel of it. It's really just kind of to activate that area.
Yeah, I would need your judgment in this case. If you're standing on the back end of your house,
On the deck?
yeah, on the deck, and you're looking out, and you're one of the great views from your house is looking at the Topa-Topas.
Yes.
And is this high enough in any way to obscure that?
No, that was kind of one of the primary things that we have been addressing the whole time. I mean, today we were going through the logistics because we wanted everything low, and nothing is higher than where the house is at. The tennis court is actually sunk, I think, 5.5 or 6 feet down. So all you'll see is trees that will be, in there, and then the building itself. But you will see the one building on the left, when you're on that deck. But it's not, it's behind all the oaks, so you'll see it through kind of like the branches and whatnot. So
And you're not planning plantings in between the 2 buildings, or
yes,
you are planning some, but will those new elements, those new trees, could those obscure the?
the topo view.
Yeah, the topo.
No, we don't want to do anything to
Okay.
obscure that view. No, please, yeah, that's,
Well,
we love
sometimes-
it. So it's, no, the new plantings are more just to kind of bury the houses. We're wherever that pool is going to be the dog run, but we want to plant all that out, and so it's all just kind of hidden behind the landscape.
Well, that's one of the problems when you try to get privacy and obscure, that building, that you would alter the view from the historic view from the Libby House.
Right, no,
Which
it's,
has to be protected at the outset.
yeah, I mean, the view that I would say is the historic view from the deck, the deck actually technically isn't original. I think that deck was built in the 80s. And the garage and the sunroom were all done in the 80s, but that view is looking east towards the topas, and so everything that we're proposing is north,
Right.
and so it's slightly east but north, but nothing obstructs the view.
And we know that the view from the street of the Libby House, that's not changed.
No, you won't even see these structures from the street just because of the way that the slope
goes
of
over
the
the
hill.
hill.
Yeah.
Okay, that answers my questions. Anybody else?
No, I did have just a general comment. I think that we're really lucky to have you as a custodian for the Libby House, and I was thinking about, so many people buy historic homes that aren't protected and demolish them and subdivide and create bizarre things, and then certain communities are really lucky, like Hillsborough has Charlie Johnson that restored Carollands, and Brentwood, I think it's Brentwood, has Gary Winnick, who did the Casa Encantada, and Joel Silvers, restored the Frank Lloyd Wright houses,
Yeah.
wearing his hands on one. So, Ojai, that is an expensive property, and you've spent a lot of money, bringing it to where it should be, and I think we need to recognize that. The Mills Act is one element of it, as far as tax relief, but it's such a minor amount of money considering the cost of the house and the money that you spend to work on it. People talk about the Mills Act as some kind of financial benefit, but, it's a big question mark. So
Yes.
just having that, and you're on a recurring, I think an annual recurring basis with the Mills Act to protect the house, really. It's not about getting some 20 grand off your taxes, I don't think. I wouldn't
Yeah.
imagine.
No, I saw some of the comments about the Mills Act for this evening, and I wrote a little bit. I don't know if I should address it now or once the comments have been noted, but I think, with the Mills Act, I've always, viewed it as more of a partnership, rather than a deal. It's a partnership that, it requires mutual respect from the city and the homeowner to preserve, these landmarks that both the city and the homeowners really care about. And the costs of maintenance on the property far exceed the tax savings. As you know, it's a wood house, and it's a living and moving thing. We have to paint the exterior, the windows and the walls probably every 3 years because of the color. So it's that dark color, and with the sun here,
Yeah.
that's a constant thing. The oaks require annual maintenance. Last year, I think we put almost $30,000 or $35,000 into tree maintenance for the property, in wiring all the branches to make sure they don't break, spraying them down, trimming them, giving them nutrition, because they were all, a lot of them were being infested with different pests that were killing some of the oaks. Beyond that, I would say also, being a part of the Mills Act, the cost of these submittals can outweigh the costs of of the savings, because going through all, with everyone, the different drawings and the back and forth, there's definitely a cost to that. And, I guess the point I'm trying to make, it's really not about the money, and making sure that it's really more about making sure these properties aren't tarnished moving forward. And I think, and I hope, thank you, and I hope you guys know that I've been a good steward and a good partner, and, we don't want to do anything that is not in the spirit of the house. We've always wanted to kind of
Yeah, I think,
embrace it.
we need to recognize that and appreciate that you're a long-term custodian, that you've made, not just a financial investment, but a family and emotional investment. And you've opened the home, to the museum dinner. You've opened the
Yes, we've
home
had-
on the home tour and had how many
We had
hundreds
the
of
holiday,
people?
holiday home to a few.
Those are big
A
commitments.
few weeks ago.
Above and beyond any Mills Act requirement, those are big commitments. So I just wanted to recognize that.
Thank you.
I just like to add to what Cindy said, because I spent a weekend there a couple of weeks ago, hurting, how many people do you think?
Like 800
Yeah,
people, I think, came through? Yeah.
coming through his house, and everyone was so appreciative of the opportunity to get in and see the home, and he was a wonderful host, and I really enjoyed that, and then just before that, you'd done the museum dinner, so we are very appreciative of that.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy doing it. We're doing another dinner, I think, in the spring. For the
You're doing the
museum.
spring
Yes.
Feast on History?
Yes.
Good.
So,
So are we.
yeah. So, but again, it goes back to, I mean, my view of it is that's part of that partnership. And, it's like we've been, I think it's a communal thing to kind of preserve these properties. And, that's really in place, I think, more to, at some point, if we do move on and sell the house, and the next person, to make sure you have the control to make sure someone doesn't come in and tear it down,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Matthew, did you have anything you would like to interject at this point about the order of events before I open it up to the public?
No, sir, I think you can take public testimony at this time.
At this time? Okay, do I have to close this meeting then?
No, you don't. No.
Okay. All right.
All the other public commenters, including Commissioner Vogt.
Okay, thank
All
you
right,
for your
thank you.
presentation. I have a speaker card from Anthony Vogt, who lives at 918 Palomar Lane, just across the street from the Libby House. And he has some remarks. He's not making these remarks as a Historic Preservation Commissioner. He's making them as a private citizen.
As Commissioner Hill has just suggested, my property adjoins the Libby Estate across Foothill Road. The estate is one of the premier historic sites in Ojai. In 1987, it became subject to a Mills Act contract. The nature of such contracts are known to all of you. It is a deal whereby the landowner gets property tax reductions in return for limiting rights to develop their property in a manner inconsistent with their historic value. Property taxes are assessed by the Ventura County assessor on a parcel basis. In 1987, the Libby estate consisted of a single parcel. Accordingly, tax benefits applied to that entire single property. The Mills Act contract was recorded, and the benefits and burdens of the contract run with the land and are binding upon current landowners. Nothing in the 2004 parcel split changed those benefits or burdens. Moreover, the Mills Act contract was automatically renewed annually after 2004. Staff now recommends approving a permit for development work on the northern portion of the estate property based upon findings that the proposed work is consistent with the Mills Act contract. It is not consistent with the contract. It would allow tax benefits on a developed portion of the property. It ignores express provisions in the contract that relate to preserving the grounds of the estate property as they were in 1987. Moreover, there's absolutely nothing in the city code allowing it to grant such a permit. Moreover, if the permit is granted, it will confuse the record title to the property. There was a proper way for the current owners to achieve their intended purpose. They could have terminated the Mills Act contract pursuant to its terms. It had run 10 years already and annually is subject to termination. They then could have sought a new Mills Act contract on the central parcel where the historically valuable structure exists. Had they gone forward in this manner, they would not have been burdened with appearing before the Historic Preservation Commission and incurring the associated costs. I think staff should have advised the landowners of the correct approach from the beginning. I think in a real sense, the landowners are victims of staff. Accordingly, staff now feels compelled to assert which I regard as a nonsensical support for the permit. They have cited government code sections such as 15064B2 as such support. There is no such government code section. There is, however, provisions bearing on such a number in Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations. They appear in Chapter 3 entitled Guidelines for the Implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act. They are directions to be followed by the lead agency. Here, the lead agency is not the HPC, but the Planning Commission. They serve the purpose of determining whether or not an environmental impact report has to be prepared. The provisions have no significance whatsoever regarding the interpretation of the Mills Act contracts. I've detailed these concerns in an email to you. I request that this email be made a part of the record in these proceedings, and I'll leave a copy of these comments with the clerk also to be included in the record.
Thank you. All right, at this point, Mr. Shamshiri, do you have any comments?
And while he's stepping up, I'll just also note for the record that a paper copy of Commissioner Vogue's email was passed out to all the commissioners and the members of the public and residents, and there are further copies available on the table. So it is in the record. Thank you.
I would address any questions. I mean, I think, I really approached this. I think I came in to see everyone to understand how to move forward. And when we had that conceptual review, I thought that if something like this was going to come up, I thought it would come up at that point. The fact that it's coming up now is a bit surprising. And again, I think, when we purchased the property, it was 3 parcels. It's always been 3 parcels. And when we were here last year discussing the wall and the gates, there was no question about whether or not that property was in Mills Act or should be in Mills Act or not. And, I'm a little bit confused by the back and forth, and I'd like to understand if the intention is to have me move out of the Mills Act or not do the project. So I'm kind of in between here. But I just, again, I would say I would appreciate some consistency because, like I said, when I was here 6 months ago when we came, a lot of that could have been addressed at that time. And since then, we've put a lot of time and energy into these plans to get them where they are today and ready to be submitted. So, but I'm happy. If you have any questions for me,
And just speaking from a commissioner's point of view, those are things, that type of conversation would be something that we wouldn't even know about. It wouldn't come up in the course of our practice of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have to be, we'd have to depend on staff to tell us how we got to the point of being at the concept review. That should be part of it. At least in my feelings, it should. And you're nodding your head and you're not so agreeable. What can we do to resolve this situation? Because there's a lot of the merits in what Commissioner Vogt was, I should say, private citizen Vogt is addressing in his letter to the commission.
Could I make a comment before you address this? I think there's a legal argument for everything. I think that's why we have 9 Supreme Court justices instead of 10 or 8, because there are always decisions to be made. Decisions are reversed, they're corrected, they're changed. There are legal arguments about everything. You can argue one side, you can argue the other. I think our job as commissioner is to listen to the advice of our city attorney, who's paid to research this and deliver this information. I appreciate Commissioner Voogt's time in looking at an alternate argument. However, we've been presented with correct information all the way down the line for 6 months, you know?
Yeah.
So I think
Well, really,
there are
it's
legal
been
arguments.
almost 6 years
you can
that I've
argue
been
everything.
following the rules of the Mills Act and coming to you guys every time
Yeah.
I have to do something. And I think, to be frank, if the suggestion at this point is for me to pull out of the Mills Act, it's a little frustrating because like I said, the cost benefit hasn't been in my favor the last
No.
6 years.
No,
And
that's
so,
clear. Well, the law isn't absolute. The law is there to be interpreted.
Yeah.
That's the law. And we have our city attorney interpreting the law to this point and guiding us. So I would like to honor that.
So.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, if I may, I don't think that we take any exception to Mr. Vogue's comments. I think what's important here is the context. It is true that the parcel on which the new structure would be built is a separate legal parcel. However, the 3 parcels that make up the Libby estate are intertwined. There's shared access between them. The structure that is to be built is on the very rear of that separate parcel, but the front part of the parcel looks for all intents and purposes to be as part of the Libby home, the estate, and it provides that direct access to the home. So yes, I mean, a different path could have been to modify or enter into a new Mills Act agreement, which would only apply to the main house and perhaps the other parcel or just the main house. But in fact, the property operates in an integrated manner. So for that reason, we believe that the approach that's before you this evening is the proper one. It'll be ultimately up to the county assessor to determine how the new structure and that parcel is assessed, and I'm sure they'll take into consideration the agreement, but they may come to a different conclusion themselves. We don't know that at this point in time. That's not really a matter for the city's, the city's judgment here, but those are the reasons that went into the basis for going forward as we are today.
I mean, can I add to it? When we were here a year ago, I don't think everyone was on the commission, but when we were reviewing but the gate and the wall, I mean, there was so many arguments about how that wall and that gate are part of the Mills Act, and that's why I have to come and present everything to everybody. So it's just surprising that it would come up at this point. So
Now, let me ask you a question. When you purchased the house,
yes.
what did the realtor tell you exactly what the qualifications were that surrounded the purchase? As far as historic?
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm saying I'm interested in this because it seems like we have people buy these houses and suddenly there's, somebody tells them, well, you get to appear, whether it's a city or another citizen or whatever, that you're in violation of this. And they said, I never heard of it.
Right.
And what do you mean my house is in an historic house? I'd like to know just what transpires. We have a couple of people who have owned these historic places, and all of you, what is it that's being said? It would be nice if they were all saying, all the realtors were saying the same thing and had the same procedure.
Yeah.
Then we would know where we stand.
Well, it wasn't terribly in depth from what I remember. I mean, I was told that it is Mills Act. They do tell you it's part of the Mills Act, and that there's a tax savings to that. I was also told that it's 3 legal parcels, and that the northern parcel is, you can develop it to whatever you want. If you want to sell it off, you can, or build a house. That was so. That's what I was told. And when I got the paperwork, when I bought the house, I had only received the single Mills Act contract for $1,000, and I thought that encompassed the entire property, but I didn't know that there were separate contracts for the separate parcels. Yeah. So that was the extent of it, But it was my first time purchasing something that was, it was a little bit, it was 2 owners at the time, and we had to buy from separate people and 3 lots, so it was a process. So.
Yeah. Well, it's too bad.
Yeah, I'm guessing real estate agents know very little about the details of the Mills Act. They know there's a Mills Act, they know there's tax savings, and I would guess that's probably all they know. But just because your property is in the Mills Act, that doesn't preclude the addition of buildings. It just has to be in conformance with the other property. We've already gone through the whole review and seen that this property does conform. We gave them approval at the last meeting, and I'm ready to go ahead and vote approval at this point. The staff has recommended, the city attorney has recommended. I see nothing that I would hold me back from voting yes on this.
Oh,
Make a motion?
In fact, I will. I'll make a motion.
Yes.
Commissioner,
Is this allowed?
I see,
Say-
one moment, Mr. Vogue, Commissioner Vogue. I'm seeing some questions from the looks. The chair has discretion to allow a further public comment or not. That's in the chair's discretion.
It's my interest in getting this thing straight, so I would recognize Anthony
okay.
for purposes.
First of all, the comments with regard to legal positions on either side. The Supreme Court ultimately comes to a conclusion, and that's the law. We have a set of circumstances here where I think I know the law fairly clearly as it's set out in elsewhere. I feel strongly about that proposition, and the simple fact that the city attorney says to the contrary doesn't convince me. I invited comments from him that might dissuade me for taking this position today. I didn't get those comments. Mention has been made about the proposition that the landowner here has been mousetrapped, which I tend to agree with. But I raised this particular issue months ago in an email to the city attorney, and I never received a reply. And it should have been addressed at that point in time. Now, basically, I have no quarrel whatsoever with the proposed development. I do quarrel, however, with the manner it's being handled. I'm perfectly willing to try to puzzle out a solution to this problem with the landowner and the city attorney. But I don't think this commission has the jurisdiction to grant the requested permit. I think basically this is a planning commission issue that will arise at such time as the Mills Act is amended or terminated. So that's where I stand on the matter.
Okay. Okay, at that point, I'm going to close the public portion and reopen our meeting of commissioners. So, from the rest of the commissioners, do I hear any motions or any discussion first?
I make a motion that we approve the plans.
I second.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second, and I'm available to answer any questions as needed, but until asked, I won't answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Only when you want me to take roll, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay. The motions are been brought forth and seconded, and it's time for a vote. So if we could take a roll call.
Commissioner Convery,
Yes. I vote
Commissioner
in
Quinn,
favor.
Yes.
Commissioner James,
Yes.
Commissioner Hill.
I'll say yes.
Okay. Motion carries. This item will be scheduled for consideration by the Planning Commission at a later date.
Okay, thank you. All right. But can we, I just would make a plea on my part, as far as the commission is concerned. Can we resolve at an earlier date procedures on, so that we don't have this lag of like 6 months before we resolve the presentations?
Part of the issue arises from the fact that staff reviewed these concerns when they were made made to staff, evaluated them, and found no concern. And because there was no concern, no further action was taken. Staff does not bring every concern that is raised to the commission's attention, but we viewed no issue with it at the time.
But I would like to expedite things so that they're brought to a head fast, and so we don't carry these things on forever. I mean, Mr. Shamshiri has had so much time looking at what he thinks is going to be a project, and he's going to be my age before he gets some of these things done. So that's the way. It seems like things happen. I don't know if the other commissioners feel the same way I do, but it's just my suggestion.
If we had different, like more, say a preservationist at the city level that could, review, that would know about these things like most of the other cities do, I wonder if it might go faster.
We do that. We hire people to do these presentations. San Buenaventura, and there's others.
Oh, not just a presentation, but someone who's kind of devoted, since it seems the historical thing is expanding, like maybe we could have a preservationist that works for the city that could address a lot of these things.
There are some cities that do that, but
Yeah.
they have better, let me put it this way, they have better equipped commissioners that they devote all their time to,
Yeah.
and they're paid too.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, from our visit to the city of Los Angeles and talking to them, and they're running, I don't know, it's 25 or 35 historic districts, as well as the thousands of historic projects. And it takes a really highly professional staff to do that, and it takes a chunk of money to do it too. And I don't think that,
Well, if we could just have one person that,
Well-
then, because it's all volunteer here, so if we had someone that, had a degree in preservation, that would really help a lot.
well,
I don't know what you
we
think,
do
so.
have, I look back at we've had architects, we've had historians, we've had all sorts of very knowledgeable people, architects. We have had attorneys now on our commission. So I think the level of, or the quality of the commissioners that we've had in the past meets the standards pretty well for a town the size of Ojai.
I don't think the quality is good. It's just that there's getting to be more work associated with all this, and, yeah.
That's part of the
I don't
nature
know.
of government.
I'm not gonna,
Ask those guys over there, they'll tell you how government is
yeah.
multiplied.
I'll suggest that you perhaps raise that point with the council, because it sounds like what you're asking for is to have a preservationist on staff. And that's a budget question for the council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, before we move on to the next item, I just wanted to indicate that with respect to the last item, Chair McCready had indicated that he wanted to note that he was in support of the proposal as well.
Okay. Thank you. That's illuminating. All right. Let me get my glasses on. I must commend the commission. I had the last meeting you had, I had an operation on my foot just a couple hours before the meeting, and I couldn't attend. And I was amazed at how quickly you disposed of business that night. I think in the 20-some odd years that I've been on this commission, never have I seen that short a meeting. So that's a goal. All right. Let me get back to that beginning here. Okay. And I really enjoyed reading the minutes of all the meetings that preceded the Libby House becoming a Mills Act property under the stewardship of Bob Smith. That was That was very interesting, reading about the good old boys of Jim Lobel and the rest of them. All right. On the next item for business, as item number 3, and this is the review and discussion of the term sheets for proposed amendments to historic preservation ordinance. Now, I served on the subcommittee that worked on these, and I know how long we worked, and Matthew was there with us, how long we worked on that and how difficult it was. And I must commend, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to take forever. I must commend whoever came up with the template or what you prepared for us as far as breaking all the aspects down. Was that staff or was that you, Matthew?
I can't take credit for that one.
But you remember what it looked like with all the red lines and so on. So,
Matt S. did the first column and Matt W. did the second column. It was a team. It was a team effort.
Well, it works pretty good. Now we're supposed to. Our charge tonight is to discuss this and come up with some areas of contention or areas that we think are just fine. And I don't know if we can get through all of this, but it's a pretty hefty amount. But we
Mr. Chairman, if I could sort of provide an overview, that might help focus the discussion.
Okay.
Great. So, Mr. Chairman, as you stated, this is the summary of the ordinance that the Historic Preservation Commission considered earlier this year.
Right.
And as you indicated, I believe about almost 2-year effort went into the subcommittee's work on this. The HPC took formal action earlier this year, as I indicated. In October, Mr. Summers and Ms. Wold made a presentation to the City Council regarding the recommended ordinance changes that had been evaluated by the Historic Preservation Commission. The City Council gave some direction at that time. It's summarized on your staff report in the first page there.
On the first one.
Correct. Most notably was to bifurcate the issue of the sites of merit from the rest of the ordinance. So if I could just draw your attention to attachment B, 2 of 2, the very last 2 pages of your staff report, that is the matrix with respect to the sites of merit. The rest of the matrix is the highlights of the rest of the recommendations that the Historic Preservation Commission made. So you have seen all these changes before. There's no difference in what was presented to you previously. It's just been organized here in a way to allow the City Council to see the basis for what the recommended changes were that the Historic Preservation Commission is making. So the first column identifies the existing ordinance section. The second column identifies the changes and provide some background on that. And the third column will generally provide some additional description of those changes. So what we're looking for tonight is your confirmation that these are the changes that you're recommending and these are the basis for the recommendations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Summers, who would be able to provide any additional detail or maybe refreshment in your as to what your actions were previously.
Before Matthew, before you speak to us about that, can we get just a brief summary of why the City Council put forth these three comments? Take the current issue, the current term sheets, and bifurcate it, separating out the sites of merit from the landmark issues. Now, why was that necessary?
As articulated by several council members and is supported by a consensus of all of them, They wanted to fully understand why the Historic Preservation Commission recommended that sites of merit be elevated from a designation-only category to a designation plus restriction category, or designation plus preservation category. They wanted to understand what the reasoning behind the HPC in recommending those changes was. And they also wanted, as the council faced the same difficulty that the commission faced in discussing the term sheet for the proposed draft ordinance all as a whole, it's a lot of material all at once, and the council wanted to divide out the sites of merit from the changes to the rest of the ordinance, viewing the sites of merit as potentially of greater controversy and of necessitating greater analysis. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does, and it bothers me. It bothers me that they should consider, just because it's on the sites of merit, that the Smith-Hobson, where we sit today, is not as important than, as far as scrutiny, if something were to go on here and they decided to just wipe out half of it and change some architectural point. I think they should be, up to a certain point, a site of merit ought to have as much integrity in its being named to such a list as a landmark.
That's the justification they're looking to hear from you guys.
But isn't a landmark voluntary,
No.
that the person that owns it, and then a site of merit is just, they're told that their house is
No,
a site of
There's
merit?
something that I need to note right now. There are no sites of merit that have been designated by the city council in the city at the
Right.
moment. There is a list of properties that were considered for sites of merit, and I believe some were previously recommended by the Historic Preservation Commission, but none of them have ever been adopted by the city council. So the provisions that are under discussion, if recommended by this commission and adopted by the city council, there would need to be further action to designate one or more properties by the council after recommendation by this commission as sites of merit.
But
Bear that in mind in your discussion. Sorry to
No.
interrupt.
But the person has they don't get to decide whether they want their house to be a site of merit or
Depends
not.
on-
As proposed in the current proposal, a site of merit would require a public hearing and an opportunity for the property owner to agree or object. It could be designated over the property owner's objection should the commission and council so choose. At the moment, sites of merit, none exist.
But they're also, once they have that, they have to pay for historical reports and work permits, where they wouldn't have had to pay for that before, correct?
That's exactly what's built into the present proposal. And so that's the choice before you, is do you wish to make that proposal
Yeah.
imposing those restrictions or not?
It should be noted that in many of the cities, and many of the biggest cities in California, the homeowner does not have the last say in what becomes an historic landmark.
Now, wouldn't that be, Matthew, taking away property rights since,
The city has the power to landmark a property over a property owner's objections if it provides a required public notice
Right.
and an opportunity for the property owner to comment at a public hearing objecting to the proposed landmark designation.
But
The
if they
same
do-
is true for the sites of merit. None, to date in this city, no properties have been landmarked over the property owner's objection, but the city
Right,
retains the power
if
to
they
do so.
do it over the property owner's objection, is that taking away their property right?
It limits their ability, it limits what they can do with their property, but it does not do so in an illegal manner if done by the city. But I'll note, the city has not done that yet.
I know it hasn't done that, but I'm just wondering, it seems to me a violation of property right to tell somebody that their house is a site of
It's,
merit.
that has been decided before the Supreme Court.
Oh, it has?
It has, yes. The,
Restrictions.
yeah, with restriction, but that,
And whether or not the proposal here meets those restrictions.
Please come to your
is not
microphone.
an issue. Yeah, I've got it on, I'm just too far away from it, I
Yep.
apologize.
so that's something that's the nature, preservationist and the whole process of landmarking items, we landmark that's a monument status. I was going to say the Washington Monument, that's designated. And if some guy just put that up there in a field years ago and kept selling it wouldn't necessarily have the rights to that because it's a Washington monument. Because the good of the building and the importance of the structure and the place supersede the nature of the right of the public in general to
Well,
enjoy
then are
it.
you proposing to use the Secretary of the Interior's standards for criteria of a site of merit? Is that part of your criteria that you're proposing?
To note, it's not my proposal. It was the ad hoc committee's proposal. I'm the scribe. But
Yeah.
that, I believe, is part of their proposal. Let me flip to that page. Yes,
And I don't mean just for treatment of property, but for the criteria.
attachment B, which is the very end of the table. Sites of merit was pulled off and segregated by itself at the very end.
All right. Are there any other comments about that point? Thank you for describing those.
I'm a little confused procedurally. This term sheet was before us once before, and we approved it, right?
Yes.
All right. Is this a different term sheet?
No, this is the same term sheet reformatted.
Can we make
Different
comments on
format?
it?
Nothing added, nothing new?
The text is the same. The text is what's built into column 2. Column 1 is the existing ordinance. Column 3 is a brief summary. As that was noted in certain places, the purpose of the proposed changes, and that's the column that the council wishes to be filled in detail, is the purpose behind the proposed changes. And so it's backed before this commission because the council felt that they did not have enough understanding of the reasoning behind the proposed changes to be able to fully act on them.
And there was no discussion of that particular point when we had the matter before us the last time, is that correct?
As I recall, the commission discussed the sites of merit issue fairly in some detail
Just that one, yeah, but not the rest.
and had a limited, less detailed discussion on some of the other points.
Can we make comments to a couple of things in here? Is that okay?
Well,
The chair runs the
I
meeting.
think that what we should do, as soon as we iron out these generalities, then we'll start and just go march right on
Okay.
through like Sherman did too.
Well, may I make a further comment?
Yeah.
I cannot go through that process, having received this just a few days ago. I once wrote a 25-page memorandum on what the commission's work was, and I wasn't too particularly pleased with it. It's simply an impossible task. I am prepared to write to the subject generally before the meeting in December, but
One of the things.
moreover, there's another consideration. This is presumably a public hearing. Nobody showed up. The reason they don't show up is it's very difficult to make sense out of this. Whatever the ultimate amendments you draft are going to be much, much more detailed than this. And they're going to give rise to further questions that the public should have an entitlement to speak to at a meeting before us.
And
Is that contemplated to occur?
Yes. The proposed path is that this commission, whether tonight or at a future meeting, will recommend back to the council, and the council directed that come back to the council in a joint meeting no later than the first council meeting in February, to have the council and the commission consider together the proposed changes at a public hearing with opportunity for public comment. The expectation is that if they wished, at that meeting, the council would direct the drafting of the full ordinance changes to build on the previous draft, modified as the council may modify. That document, once drafted, would return to the Historic Preservation Commission for discussion at public hearing, then back to the council for adoption at a public hearing.
Can we ask clarification questions on some of these?
Yes, of course,
We're going to
but
go through it page by
so-
page.
I think we're going to go in
If I
order.
say nothing at this point in time, I haven't waived any rights that I might have either as a commissioner, as a member of the public, to object to whatever the final form of ordinance is.
May I
Is
speak?
that true?
You would continue to have the right to comment all the way through the council's action and adopting it at second reading.
Okay, I think
The
on
later
that
you're-
basis, we're kind of wasting our time going through it.
It's worth noting that comments provided at the term sheet stage are valuable for the council. This is your opportunity to seek to convince the council of the merits of your proposed changes. If you,
No,
Commissioner Hill, I have a comment.
Yes, I was just going to call on you.
Thank you. First of all, we have had this since June. I mean, we were appointed in May, I think, and we've had the changes and this code before us that Craig Walker and Rose and you all worked on, and we've discussed it several times. So I do have to point that out. I find this much easier to read. Thank you so much for organizing it. It's very clear and simple. I think it's well worth going through it, as Terry suggested, Commissioner Hill. And I'm just looking at things like who decides what a repair is, who's going to, are we following the basic code as to the definition of repair, the IRS definition, that kind of thing. Those are the kind of questions I have. And if we're following, which I believe we're following the same process the Building Appeals Board did when they came up with the vacant building ordinance, we'll have more than ample opportunity to comment as this moves along, correct?
yes, as noted, there will be at least 2 further public hearings and 3 public meetings. The joint meeting between the council and the commission, following, at which we expect direction to be given to convert the term sheet to a draft.
Yeah.
Then a public hearing before this commission, then a public hearing before the council.
So what I'm seeing here are comments like the one that Commissioner Hill brought up about landmark status sites of merit and who's going to define the word repair, and just general questions to inform us further as we move down the line. Correct? That's what we're doing, right? Yes. Okay.
Right. Now, the one thing also with the city council directions here, it said to bring back the amended term sheets that include the justification to the council in a joint meeting no later than the end of the first week of February. I don't know if that's being realistic. We'll try as best as we can, but it might be later than that February meeting to get through all of this.
That was the timeline the council directed. We act as they direct. My suggestion would be that at the joint meeting to come in February, this commission could ask the council for more time.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, that's sensible.
Good point.
Okay, all right. Well, let's wade in. One of the things that you'll notice on this, there's a lot of no changes on here, and so we can fly by those, of course.
Not really.
Not really.
Unless you want to add more to it. I gotta get, this thing went in. Yeah, okay.
I
gotta
also
get
have
right into
another,
this.
I have another comment, if you don't mind. Do you mind? Can I make another comment? I think this is really important. I think Darwin McCready and Brian Akins should really be involved in this conversation.
I do too.
Can we ask a few questions tonight without them?
Well, I think we can go as far as we can.
Okay.
But I think we're going to have to double back when they're here. I don't want to waste our time with that.
Well, why don't we do this? We can't really stamp it in gold until we finish the whole thing. And so what we discussed tonight would be tentative, and that would be, they could wade in on the tentative changes that we made, have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. That'd be good.
I think that approach would work.
Okay. All right, now, starting with, on page 1 of 27, we see the title, there's no change. The purpose. And one of the things I noticed that I made a comment a couple of meetings ago that we should indeed include, we had at our one of our last meetings with the subcommittee, we eliminated monuments. And then I said, please bring those things back because we have discovered we do indeed have some monuments. And so I'm pleased that that was in there before you added the second column of proposed changes. So
I have a question on this one here.
Okay?
It says, adopt the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties as the city's guiding principles. But are we also adopting the criteria of the Secretary of the Interior for historic?
Part of it.
Like, can that be part of that, or is that part of that already? I'm not even sure.
That's what the guiding principle is.
Guiding principles for reviewing historic, okay, that's what I thought, but it wasn't. So we're doing the criteria and the standards for treatment, both. Is that correct, ma'am?
My understanding was that the reference to the criteria in section 4807, page 9, would remain as they are now.
Oh, so you're not going to use the Secretary of the Interior for criteria?
Yes, that was my understanding.
That's what I
But this
thought.
is the question, again, this is not what I want, this is what you want. If
Okay.
you want
That's
to use
not-
those criteria,
No,
that's
that's what I
within your power.
recommended, that we use those criteria because that's basically what the state goes by. And for people to get Mills Act, we should really be following the Secretary of the Interior's criteria for historic evaluation of properties. Otherwise, it becomes so, there's just really no criteria, and just about anybody can make something historic. There's no architectural criteria. They don't know much about period architecture. That's why I think it'd be good to have a preservationist that knows more about the art history part of it.
So
in
it
the
sounds like
city.
you're proposing that we make a change to that section 4807. So
Yeah.
we
To make it to the criteria.
to have the criteria conform to the Secretary of the
to
Interior
this
standards.
historic treatment of properties, yeah.
Okay.
Because how could you treat the properties in that manner if it's not also following the criteria of the Secretary of the Interior?
May I comment on that?
Sure.
Okay, there's a difficulty here. The difficulty is the confusion of Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. Chapter 9 relates to the Mills Act contract, and Mills Act contract provisions stand independently from the provisions of Chapter 8. For that reason, I am very much opposed of bringing in the guidelines of the Secretary of Commerce or whatever else it is. But I also am opposed on a different basis. That is to say, there are provisions in the existing Chapter 8 that express fairly clear criteria. I have a quarrel with some of the language of it. They're set out in Section 4.8.07, criteria for consideration of nomination. Guidelines are guidelines. They're not law. I sit back as a lawyer and say to myself, do I follow the law? I can find the law in Chapter 8. I don't find any law in the guidelines. The guidelines are made law by the form of the Chapter 9 Mills Act agreement. You have to comply with it. But moreover, the idea that every time I look at a nomination of a landmark that I have to drag out about 50 pages of material from the Secretary of Commerce, review it to see whether or not it's any way inconsistent with what we propose to do or what otherwise is provided in Chapter 8, seems to me to be a big waste of time. So I don't like the incorporation of the guidelines, and I don't think it helps historic preservation.
Do you mean the guidelines for the treatment of buildings or the guidelines for criteria of historic?
Right.
Criteria, you don't like that?
No, maybe I misspoke. But they're guidelines. They're not binding. Unless they're made a part of a contract. And they're not going to be made part of a contract under Chapter 8.
Right.
Now,
It's worth considering that if they are adopted by the city, they become law. Chapter 8 is law, as is Chapter 9,
right.
if the council and commission so choose.
So here you have a reference to the guidelines. You don't have an adoption of the guidelines. If you had an adoption of the guidelines, then you'd have to change Section 4.807, and that would be the proper place to put it.
The city has the power to adopt some but not all of the guidelines. Again, should the commission and council so choose. That's what's being asked, is do you wish to adopt the guidelines as part of the city's historic preservation ordinance or not?
No, I don't see it that way. The language, as I recall, is guiding principles for historic property. It isn't controlling principles. It appears right there in column 2.
But you have to meet only one of the criteria, correct, to be historic?
I think we're mixing two different concepts.
Okay.
That is correct, Commissioner James, but the question in section 4802 is whether or not the city wishes to adopt the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties,
Yeah.
which provide a number of detailed recommendations and processes to use in maintaining historic property.
Are we adopting them as law or as guiding principles? Right here, it says guiding principles.
Guiding principles expressed in law that are used to interpret the rest of the provisions and that are applied as the city so chooses, or as the commission and the council
So the purpose
direct.
of law is to guide the public in terms of what they must and must not do. So if you talk about the guidelines determine what you must do or may not do, then you can't express it in terms of principles. And you should express it in terms of become the law of the city of Ojai. And they don't work that way. If you read through them, they're a mess in terms of that context.
That
It's
is-
too general. It's way, way too general if you look through those guidelines. And I imagine I can find 100 of them that we don't want, provisions that we don't want to apply to us.
All points to note to the council.
Okay.
All right.
It's interesting
Okay,
that,
can we start marching through this thing, or we're never going, we have 27
Well,
pages?
I think I have some more comments.
Oh, you do?
That's why I was unable to prepare something in writing for you.
Can I just interrupt one second? Commissioner Hill, this is exactly why I think going through all this in detail tonight, we're going to have to do it all over again when the other two are here, because all of the comments that Commissioner Vogt makes, all of them that Commissioner James, all of them that I make, Commissioner Convery, they're going to want to know what
Right.
was said. So I personally think we should postpone this. We should all become familiar with it and just talk in depth at the next meeting.
isn't the next meeting with the city, or is it?
No,
Okay.
there's one in
separate.
between.
Okay. I didn't know that.
And Commissioner Hill, you mentioned that you wanted to have more time before the February deadline. Because we're missing 2 commissioners tonight, I think that's a valid request.
To ask
That
for
wasn't anticipated.
Right.
So
To ask for a
yeah.
continuance.
Yeah, we need that because we need all of our commissioners here to really properly address this.
Yeah, it brings more weight to the issues. Kind of like when we get voted down 7-0 and the planning commission got voted down 7-0 on the Neff Lounge, all of that weight. We whiffed on that.
Yeah.
I move we
So-
continue the matter to the next meeting.
I second.
Any commentary?
I didn't know we had another meeting. I thought the next meeting was with the city, with us, but that's good.
Go ahead.
Okay, can we do a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Quinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Convery,
Yes.
Commissioner James,
Yes.
Commissioner Vogt,
Yes.
Chairman Hill.
Yes,
Motion carries.
all right. Now, well, that, gonna lighten the load tonight. We will have informational items. First, I would like to ask, and this would be an inquiry on my part. When I watched that short meeting, I noticed that Commissioner James and some others weren't aware of the location even, or of some of the historic properties that we have in the city. Have all of the commissioners now received the Big Thick Handbook?
Big thing.
You don't have a, and because it has the history of all the,
No, I don't.
all of our sites.
I must
And
have
it
been
has
here when you
pictures of all the plaques and all the procedures that we go through. And I know what we rush to fill the ranks of the commission, because we lost so many members at that time. It would be nice if we could, do you have one?
Yeah, I think we got them in the mail, correct?
I didn't
in
receive it.
Binder, the big binder?
Maybe September we got them in the mail?
I don't have it.
I don't have it either.
It wasn't a
I
binder,
sort of
but
have
it
a
was
feeling I'm playing,
very
not playing with a
Oh,
full
no,
deck.
Yeah,
I'm
me
talking
too.
about a thick binder like this.
No, we got a
No.
packet with sites of
I
merit.
don't have that binder.
Okay, I think that it's so that everybody can bring their knowledge to the meeting and be fully aware of what's going on before them. It's terrible to have to start up a commission from scratch, and that's essentially what we are doing. Here you have two commissioners that were semi-old, and all the rest of the U4 are all brand new. And so there's a lot of water that went under the bridge, and lots of these arguments and contentions and subcommittees and so on that have gone on before you. And it would be nice to bring you up to speed. And the book is really an enjoyable thing to read about the history of these places that we have. It's interesting reading about this building here, and this is coming up for consideration as a landmark status, our own city hall, and one of the most important estates because of the people that lived here in the city, and it's not even a landmark. But all of those things are in this book.
No, we got a thing with a listing of all the historic
Well,
properties, but we didn't
this isn't a
get,
list.
yeah, we didn't get the binder.
I'll bring mine. You know what one I'm talking about, don't you?
I
The
don't
big-
know, but I'll follow up with Sherry and find out.
Well, sure, and Kathleen would know too. So, all right, so, informational items, future agenda items from the staff, can you tell us what those would be?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the only items pending right now are the work permit for your January meeting, and of course, continued discussion regarding the term sheet.
Okay,
We are expecting any day now the historic report for this historic resource survey for the Smith Hobson House. I expect that,
Very good.
if it wasn't delivered today, any moment now.
that's being done by San Buenaventura?
No, that's being done by Carol Donato. I forget the name of her firm right now. It'll come to me. She's preparing the historic resource surveys for both the Smith Hobson House and for the Chaparral School. That report is lagging a little bit because of difficulty in accessing some of the drawings that the school district has. But that should be submitted in the next 30 days as
Okay.
well. And that's a summary, Mr. Chairman, of where we are.
All right. Planning report, receipt, okay.
I have
you
a
had one?
comment again.
Okay.
What about the list of historic monuments? I've been pinging on this for about 4 months now. Is anything going to be done in that regard?
Refresh our memory? Which document are you referring to? There's a couple of, the
There
list
is
of
on our
landmarks.
website a list of historic monuments. It's shot through with errors. We discussed it at a meeting, and we were going to fragment it into two types of lists. One, sort of the legal list for use by us, and then another for use by the public so they could get out and see these places.
Right.
Right,
And-
we were going to update the, we were going to update the public list, but scrub it of the personal information regarding property owners and what have you, so that it would just basically identify the landmark, the location or address, and so on. And we haven't had a chance to do that yet, but we'll add it to the list here.
Thank you.
Okay, I would suggest that when you get your list finished, run it by the people at the museum, because they might be able to add some to what you come up with. Because they do have a visitors center at the museum, and they send people out to these locations all the time.
Oh, another great thing that I read on the web, that was on the website, was a historical survey done by San Buenaventura Associates, which talks about the historical context and periods of Ojai, as well as the architectural periods, and
Well, we
survey
have,
of all, I mean, that'd be a great thing for us to all read too, if it was still on the website.
that is being handled by several former commissioners, historic preservation commissioners.
Can we get
Greg?
copies of that, or so that we could
What?
read all?
Just go on the website and print it
I
out?
don't think it's there anymore, but
Nope, they took it down on the basis that it's non-official
Oh.
and confusing. And I'm still at sea what that means, since it's very official in the sense that the city paid for those surveys. I think
No,
it
there's a
relates
different
to
one.
what you said
Oh,
at the
you
point
mean-
in time.
You're-
Periods.
That people got unhappy with
Historic-
those
it's like historic
surveys at a
context.
point in time. And
Are you talking about the historic reports for each landmark?
no, it was
No.
a context report for
This-
the whole
this was
city
a
of
survey
Ojai,
of
and a
none
survey.
Of all properties in the city.
I
There are
believe
two
the
of them, in
context
fact.
report is still accessible.
But it has a survey of
It
all the
is-
properties too, it was
Th-
awesome.
That is no longer posted.
It-
The historic context report is still accessible.
Okay, but the surveys are not, right?
The survey is not.
All right. Is the survey
I
binding
know it.
upon me?
Are you talking?
Maybe Matt can answer the question, because I happen to live in a structure that is classified in a certain manner that gives rise to obligations under the government code. So, and as I read the government code, it doesn't make a whit of difference whether or not the survey is approved by the city or not approved by the city.
Is
And
this,
I think I'm entitled, I think I'm entitled to know whether I'm subject to those obligations or not. And I think a simple removal of the surveys from the website doesn't make them go away.
is this the survey that was prepared by Santa Buenaventura?
Yes,
Tura-
yes.
And was shot down, you can say that was shot down by your city council,
Oh,
because we had a giant meeting of several commissions, and the public all came. They were coming in from everywhere, and an attorney in town, not you, but every attorney in town was looking there, finding a house on Drown Street or some other street that was listed just because it was 50 years old, and it was listed under this survey. They all thought that their house was about ready to be declared a landmark, and they don't have any idea. That survey had 750 or 1,000? 900, so it was big. And they all get the press did a terrible job about reporting on it. And so they kind of pulled it back because we no longer were using it in our commission meetings because it got people too excited. And that's what prompted the city council to say, well, we do understand that there needs to be protection for a building like this one, or a building in different places throughout the city, from a demolition permit. They could come out with, the owner could come out with a demolition permit, and unless it was protected under some way, it could be torn down. And the historic commission could jump up and down all they wanted, there would be no protection for it. So they asked us to, the city council asked us to prepare a sites of merit list. And that's what you have now. And that was worked on by another subcommittee.
Oh, yeah, no, I was looking at it because it was really informative on how you determine whether something's historical or not, and they did a really good job of that.
Can speak to
Yeah.
this.
I would appreciate it.
Thank you. The 2001 survey, which is the survey that Commissioner Hill is speaking of.
2011,
2011, 2011?
2011, I
Yeah.
said 2001, yeah.
2011 is the same thing as 2011, right?
Just for
2001.
clarification.
No, not 2001. 2011, 2011, thank you. That survey was not adopted by the city council.
No.
And as at the meeting that I think you attended, I did not attend, but the council did not adopt that survey. Therefore, the council did not adopt the methodology inherent in that survey. Therefore, the council did not adopt the conclusions in that survey regarding what properties are and are not of sufficient historic merit or potential historic merit to warrant further review. As such, the survey is not relied on by the city for those purposes because it was not adopted by the council. It is, of course, existent. And so the information in the survey is considered by the city because the information is information. The bell can't be unrung, but the value judgments made by that survey were what was rejected by the council.
But the value judgments were consistent with the National Register criteria. So they
Well, that's what,
Well,
that's
let me
because,
go back.
that's because Santa Buenaventura uses those.
yeah.
That's one of their tools. The thing about, go ahead, Anthony, I had a comment
Well, the government code refers to that survey, right?
That survey does not meet all of the requirements to qualify as a capital H, capital S historic survey under the Public Resources Code. Certain provisions of CEQA speak to particular types of historic resources surveys that meet several criteria. That survey did not meet all of those criteria, and thus was not a survey that creates presumptive resources under
It certainly meets the
CEQA.
criteria set out in the statute.
Well,
It does not meet the
Because simply-
criteria set out in the statute.
It simply says, or at least in my communications with the state, they say it had to be conducted pursuant to procedures, certain procedures.
well,
It was not completed pursuant to the full requirements is necessary to create a presumptive resource under CEQA.
let me give you a little bit of history on the survey itself. Our commission requested some sort of a survey like they did back in the days, the earlier survey where they did it for the county. The whole county was done, and all of Ojai was done. The Ojai City Council wouldn't allow it to happen in the city of Ojai.
Right, the council rejected it then too.
That's just back in the Jim Lobel days. And so we kept asking, we would work, and then we didn't even know a certain house existed because it was back in the trees and so on. And we kept saying, there is information about these houses. There's information in different locations. Can't we have something? And we put it in our budget, and they spent so much 1 year. We saved our money some more, spent so much the next year. And what the survey that was ultimately used by the city was what they only was called a wind chill survey. It was not a completed survey. And that's what, if we had gone all the way with the Santa Buenaventura Associates survey and did the next part where they would make the visitations and make the assessments on all of the things that are required, then you would have had a valid one that the city could have used. But the city was facing financial circumstances, and they didn't want to go any farther and spend any more money. And so where that survey is used now is just at the desk when people come in for permits and so on, and they check it out and see where it stands. And they gave a rating for each
And
kind of house.
even in that moment, the community development department, again, it is an information source, but it is
Exactly.
the
data sheet.
ratings, the value judgments inherent in that survey are not directly relied on by staff because the council rejected them.
Right.
The staff follows the council's direction.
The rejection, was that by resolution, but?
the council does not need to always act by resolution, and I do
Well,
not know.
I'm fully aware of that proposition.
Right.
But then again, it seems to me the survey was the basis of all the hassling Mr. Keats went through unnecessarily, right?
I can't speak to that particular situation. That is not on tonight's agenda.
That's not on what?
Tonight's agenda.
Agenda.
Oh, this is informational discussion at this point in time, so it's unlimited and
No, it is not unlimited. It's brief comments on items that may need to be added to a future agenda.
okay,
And there's no present pending permit application set to come before you because this property is not landmarked and does not require
well,
a work
I
permit.
think we ought to know what the impact of the survey is. Don't worry about it. I understand your position. I'll pursue it with you further. But I'll tell you, in trying to puzzle this stuff out, it is a world-class mess. And
Well,
I just want to know get
That
a
we-
firm answer to the proposition of whether or not those surveys have any legal
Well,
effect.
that one
You
was-
say no, and the government code says yes.
They did manage to get the architectural styles right for Ojai, but they didn't.
oh, we had those architectural styles, and our, we would make lists every year at the.
They did a good
at
job
the-
on that.
At the historic
I thought.
retreat. We always had a retreat at the beginning of the year where we would set the priorities for the commission. And we worked hard at that. But we have always had the,
Architectural styles.
sure,
With
we've
the
had
time
that.
periods that they go with
Sure.
and everything, yeah. They did a good job on that.
I have a question, Mr. Summers. So when I came into the front desk to apply for landmark status on our house on Aliso, Sherry had a list there that she looked at, and she said, oh, yes, this is category 1. So is that the same survey that we're talking about
That's it.
that
Right.
is being used to make determinations? Because she said if you weren't in number 1, you would not be able to file.
Again, I'm not sure what was said in that conversation with Ms. Herbrook, and that also is not on tonight's agenda, but I'm happy to
But I'm
speak to you
just,
after
I'm
the
just
meeting.
wondering if it's the same thing we're talking
It
about.
is, because I looked at it in detail, and there's category 1, 2, and 3, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's
There
a
may
big-
have been errors made in the
That's a
past.
big book, too.
It is.
To contain 900. And the amazing thing is that I live in the guest house to the house, the first historic home that Cindy Convery owned and had it landmarked and so on. And my house isn't even on the list. It's not, they didn't even survey it because I live on a flag lot and they couldn't see it from
If they
the
couldn't, see-
street.
they did make that mention, if they couldn't see some of the
Yeah.
properties, they weren't
Right.
gonna.
Anyway,
I have a quick motion.
oh,
I think this is an issue that ought to be resolved. I don't think it's clear at all, and can we put it down to get it resolved at the next meeting?
I
Or
Second
put it
that.
on the list?
I second that.
think it's, in my opinion, it's a dead horse. The city council doesn't care for the nature of it, and that's why we changed from that survey use to the sites of merit list as far as significant houses.
There's a lot of really valuable information in that survey, though.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think you can just throw it out.
No, I'm saying as far as a practical tool. It's still a resource. Yeah, it's because it's got all the data, all the addresses, all the locations and so on. But there's holes in it, lots of holes. Okay, can we move on to any other informational items? Okay, there being no more,
There's a motion open,
what was that?
a motion that we
You might add
address
it,
the legal status
Oh.
of the surveys that have been taken down from the website and are no longer available to the public, and reach a conclusion of whether or not they've been invalidated by resolution or otherwise. And I think would be helpful in that regard in terms of understanding the relationship between our functions as a Historic Preservation Commission of the city of Ojai and the state's involvement in requirements with regard to historic properties.
Staff would need direction from the city council to put any work into that. My suggestion would be to, if you wish, ask the council that question at your joint meeting.
Well, let me make another alternative suggestion. I'll write it up. As I understand it, I might ask you a few questions.
And
then
again, I would
present it
need-
at the next
again, I'd need
meeting
direction
for
from the council.
consideration.
Yeah. It's a good idea, Matt.
I would need direction from the council before considering those issues. My recommendation is you ask the council, but you're, of course, free to analyze the issues and write them up.
All right.
So you have a better audience that way. So there
But
was.
the council's already made it a dead issue, right?
Now,
Council did reject the survey in 2011. It is, of course, a new council, but the
Right.
council did make their decision previously.
okay, but what you just said troubles me. That is to say, I ask you a question about something, and you're saying, in effect, you can't answer the question without,
Being on the agenda.
without permission from the council. Is that true?
On an item that was,
I regard you as sitting here as a resource for the Historic Preservation Commission. You're not much of a resource if you can refuse to answer questions on the basis it hasn't been authorized by the council.
I serve as a resource for the commission to answer questions as asked by the commission. On an item that was previously firmly rejected by the council, you would need to seek council permission to reopen that
Okay,
item.
My question to you is, show me the document where it was firmly
I'd like to
rejected.
see that, too.
All right, we're wasting our time. I'll write something up on the subject.
Okay, so we need a verbal report from the staff on current and planning activities that potentially involve historic preservation.
No other comments, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And commissioners' comments. Anybody have a commentary tonight? And the council liaison is not in appearance. And I'm going to adjourn the meeting at, what is that, 6:43.
42.
Meeting is adjourned.